This presentation is going to focus on the ESA methodology of teaching. In our teaching methodologies section, we briefly had a look at what ESA was about, but in this presentation we're going to look in greater detail about that particular methodology. This particular methodology is accredited to Jeremy Harmer from his Practice of English Language Teaching book. It's a three-stage methodology, and what we're going to do is to look at the purpose of each one of these stages and some typical activities that take place during those stages. So the first stage is known as the engage, and its sole purpose, as the name implies, is to get the students talking and thinking in English. There is no reason whatsoever when these students come to your class that they should have said a single word of English up until that point in time during the day. So we cannot expect them just to come in and immediately start talking in English. We need to have some activity, such as the engage, to get them warmed up. There are a number of activities that we can do in order to do this, and what we try to ensure is that these activities involve everyone in the class, that they are interactive and fun. So some examples of these activities. A game that we can play is known as Fizz Buzz, and in Fizz Buzz what you do is you go around the class, each person saying a number. Let's say we start off between the numbers 1 and 30. They just go around the class, each person going through the numbers. In the second round, what we do is we ask them for every number that is a multiple of 3, 6, 9, 12 and so on, they say the word fizz. And then in the third round, they not only do that, but every number that is a multiple of 5, 10, 15, 20 and so on, they say the word buzz. And this really gets them to have to use their thought for English as to whether they say the number, or they say fizz, or they say buzz, or indeed with numbers such as 15, whether they say the words fizz buzz. So it's a very nice activity to get them going. A second idea that we could use here is that we get them to create lists. So we give them a topic, let's say fruit and vegetables, and they go around the class having to produce a list of various things. Another idea may be something like an alphabet game, where they have to create nouns following the letters of the alphabet. So each of these ideas is purely and simply to get the students talking and thinking in English. They are interactive in that the students have to communicate to us. And the third thing we need to ensure is that everyone in the class has said something by the end of our engage phase. The second stage or phase of the lesson is known as the study phase. And really the purpose of this phase is to cover the actual teaching of the lesson and to check understanding of that material. Typically, in an ESA lesson, the study phase will have two parts. The first phase of the study is to cover the actual teaching component in what's known as the board work. And what we try to do in the board work phase is to elicit, to gain information from the students about the teaching point. So this is very different to the normal didactic way of teaching, where someone stands at the front and explains the information. In the ESA methodology, wherever possible, you are trying to draw the information out from the students in this process known as elicitation. Once that information has been generated on the board, what the teacher can then do is cover any gaps in knowledge that they're unable to elicit from the students. The teaching point then being complete, we can then move over into the second part of the study phase, which is to check the students' understanding of this information. The second part of the study phase, once we've elicited this teaching point from the students, is to then check their understanding. Now, one question that's often used in classrooms to check understanding is, do you understand? Really, this is a waste of time, because the students will quite often say yes, whether or not they do. And so in order to check understanding, what we have to do is to ask targeted, specific questions about the teaching point. So what these questions have to tell us is by answering them, the students have an understanding of the material that we've covered in the teaching point. The types of questions that we ask could be, for example, what are known as gap fill activities. So quite often they have a sentence where there is a gap and they have to choose typically a vocabulary word in order to complete that sentence and make it make sense. Another example of an activity might be something like a matching exercise. And there are all sorts of things that they could match. For example, they might match a word to a picture, or they might match a picture to a description, or they could match a word to a description itself. So again, both of these activities are very targeted in that the students have to be able to understand the material in order to get the answer correct. Another type of activity that can be used here we could describe as word order, and typically you will take a sentence and scramble it up, and the students then have to recreate that sentence in the correct order to make it sensible. Again, this will show understanding of the particular vocabulary or grammar point. And so, on to the final phase of the ESA lesson, which is called the activate phase. What we have done so far, if you remember, is to engage the students to get them talking and thinking in English. Where possible, we've elicited the teaching point from the students and covered any gaps in knowledge to make sure that the teaching point has been fully covered. And then we've checked understanding of that teaching point by asking targeted and specific questions. Usually, the types of activities that we've done for the study phase will involve using a single word in order to answer those questions correctly. This, however, is not how language is actually used. When we use language, we always use it in some form of context. So the purpose of the activate activity is to put that teaching material into some form of context, something realistic that the students would actually use. Okay, so let's look at some typical activities that could be used for the activate stage of a lesson. Remember, what we're trying to do is to get the students to use the language that they've learnt in some form of realistic context. So, typical activities may include role plays where the students take on the role of a doctor or a dentist or a patient, and they actually generate a set of language that uses this particular teaching. Another example that they could do would be surveys where each of the students get up and they go around and they ask questions of all the other students. This type of activity where all students get up and interact with each other is often called a mill drill. The final type of activity that we'll put in here is that the students can have a debate about a particular subject. Now, if we think about the activities that we're doing here, what we can see, as opposed to the study activities where we had targeted specific language, each of these activities is actually going to generate different answers depending upon which student we interview or have the role play for. So this is using language in a realistic way rather than just answering a single question.